Hello, I'm Catherine Spencer, CEO of Seafarers UK. Seafarers UK is a charity providing over £2 million of grant funding to charities and organisations who support the welfare needs of people who work at sea. I'm your host for today's webinar, which will focus on our new report, Fishing Without a Safety Net. I need to begin with some housekeeping tips while you're making yourself comfortable. This is a webinar, so you're unable to turn your video or unmute yourself, but you can submit questions to the panel at any time by using the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. You can also upvote the most interesting questions by using the thumbs up button, and the most upvoted questions will move to the top of the list to be answered first. The chat can be used to interact with panelists and attendees, but please keep your questions in the Q&A panel. If you would like to tweet during the webinar, we'd really like you to. Please use the hashtag #TheSafetyNet. First on our agenda is the Fisheries Minister, Victoria Prentice. I am pleased to share that DEFRA showed very early interest in our work on the financial resilience of fishers and awarded a grant to support the research. So we'll begin with a specially pre-recorded message from Victoria Prentice, Member of Parliament for North Oxfordshire and Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for DEFRA, better known to all of us as the Minister responsible for fisheries.
Hello, Catherine, and all the virtual guests, and thank you for asking me to help launch Fishing Without a Safety Net. I'm really sorry we can't meet today, but I wanted to acknowledge the important research that you've done, which gives us a much better understanding of the financial vulnerabilities of small-scale fishermen. As we all know, fishing is a perilous profession, both in terms of personal safety and in terms of making a living. You're vulnerable to the weather, to market disruption, as we've all seen this year with the corona pandemic, to price disruption on a general basis, and of course to quota allocations. This is a very broad report which looks deeper than money and considers as well the problems that fishermen have with stress, anxiety, and alcohol and drug use. The recommendations point to how the industry and government can work together to address these issues, and I look forward to considering them more fully and working out how to respond in due course. I'd like to finish by thanking Seafarers UK for everything they do to support the industry. These are challenging but exciting times for UK fishing, and thank you for helping me be part of the launch today.
Thank you, Minister Prentice, for taking the time to contribute that introduction. The Minister has also contributed a forward to the research in which she says, the report brings new insights into the financial culture and needs of share fishers in the UK. And she shares our ambition for her research when she says, I hope that this report will contribute to improving fishermen's financial health and resilience and their well-being as together we tackle COVID-19 and embrace the opportunities ahead as an independent coastal state. We've been very grateful to the Minister and all of her team at DEFRA for their support for this research and our efforts to support the financial resilience of fishers. So up on the screen now is our agenda, and I'll begin by explaining a little about Seafarers UK, our interest in fishing and why we've taken forward this research before I hand over to Dr. Paul Jones from Liverpool John Moores University, who'll share with you the main findings from the research. Deborah Lade, our Grants Director, will set out the recommendations and how we'll take them forward, and you'll be glad to know that there'll be a comfort break from 10:55 to 11:05, during which there will be our photos of fisherwomen. I hope this will whet your appetite, as there will then be a short 5-minute film during which Craig Easton will talk about his fisherwomen photography project. This will be followed by Dr. Madeline Gustafsson. Her research reveals the sometimes invisible role of women in fishing, and more specifically, the financial contribution made by women. We'll then hear from Miles Cowley, the manager of the Seafarers Advice and Information Line, also known as SAIL, a free phone advice service for seafarers, which is joint funded by Seafarers UK and the Seafarers Hospital Society. Miles will discuss how fishers were impacted during the worst of the COVID-19 lockdown period and how SAIL were able to help. And at the end of those presentations, I'll be joined by all of our speakers and Barry Dees, the Chief Executive of the National Federation of Fishermen's Organisations, for a Q&A panel. And that will also be your opportunity to ask questions of our speakers. Please use the Q&A function to share your question. You can also upvote any questions that you really want to see answers. So that's what we have to look forward to. Before we get into our new research, I'd like to introduce Seafarers UK to those of you who might be less familiar with our work. In 1917, we were formed as the King George's Fund for Sailor in response to activities in the First World War. We're a grant funder of charitable welfare services for the maritime community, and we award over £2 million in grant funding every year. We support health, welfare and the safety needs of people working at sea, and we regularly support 25 welfare charities with an annual grant. This includes many well-known welfare charities such as Mission to Seafarers, IceOne and Stella Maris, and of course we're a fundraising charity. We rely on your support. So since our inception in 1917, fishers have been absolutely at the heart of what we do. Although they're older than us, in our very first year, one of the first grants we ever awarded was to the Fishermen's Mission. And the Fishermen's Mission are one of those 25 charities that we continue to support with funding for their core costs. Seafarers UK has awarded grants worth £2.6 million to the Fishermen's Mission in the last decade, and that doesn't include their application for a grant this year. But it does include our largest ever non-capital grant for the SeaFit Health Programme, which was a 2-year programme in partnership with Seafarers Hospital Society, delivering mobile dentistry and healthcare at fishing ports around the UK. It also includes a grant award of £200,000 awarded in April this year, which the Fishermen's Mission used to make hardship grants to fishers who were so badly impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. And all of this demonstrates how much we value the Fishermen's Mission as a key delivery partner in our support for fishers. Other than our support for Fishermen's Mission, we recognised we needed to know more and do more to support fishers, which is why we commissioned the Fishing for a Future research report, which was released in 2018. And it's seminal national research which provided clear evidence of fishers' needs. It informed Seafarers UK's funding support for fishers' welfare and safety, and highlighted health, safety, literacy, and some financial problems, which resulted in even more funding for the Fishermen's Mission. The Fishing for a Future research provided an evidence base to understand the type of funding support needed by fishers and led to many more new initiatives and projects too. For example, health needs were supported with the SeaFit Health Partnership Programme delivered by Fishermen's Mission and Seafarers Hospital Society. Literacy needs have been addressed with grant funding for the popular Fathom podcast run by the Cornish Fish Producers Organisation, which allows the communication of regulatory and other important changes. And then there's the Animation Project, which supports fishers to access EMFF grants. Additionally, financial needs were supported with a grant for a credit union loan guarantee fund to support access to EMF grants. In addition, we've supported a number of port infrastructure projects throughout the country. So now the reason you're all here, I hope, is our introduction to the main feature, our report, Fishing Without a Safety Net. And it's really revealing. It drills down into financial needs, demonstrating that money underpins many mental health and relationship problems, such as stress, anxiety, and depression. And it's this economic necessity which drives fishers out to sea. They can't afford not to work. And if your mind is not on the job because you're worried about money and relationship problems, it can lead to accident and safety issues. We're already funding interventions related to the problems. One example is access to the National Relate Counselling Service, in addition to funding other forms of mental health support. But this research explores the root cause of these problems and uncovers a way forward. We commissioned Paul Jones, a leading expert in financial inclusion, and who now knows a little bit more about fishing as a result of this research. And the research really demonstrates that we can't talk about mental health and safety without considering the pivotal role of personal finance. Our new research report, Fishing Without a Safety Net, recognises that many of the financial difficulties experienced by small-scale coastal share fishers are ingrained within the much valued approach taken to share fishing. For example, share fishing has existed since medieval times, but it also has more modern elements similar to self-employment. For example, self-assessment for tax and national insurance, and the need to make your own arrangements for sick pay, holidays, and pensions. And it also has elements similar to those who work within the gig economy, for example, short-term casual labour, and the lack of job or income security, and other variables such as out-of-control income caused by the weather, tide, and the availability of fish. This research started off as a small project which grew as interest developed in the subject, and we're really grateful for funding which was provided by the Fishmongers Company Charitable Trust, DEFRA, and the Marine Charities Group. You'll see that the research reveals a confirmed link between financial stress and many mental health and relationship problems, as well as the significance and range of women's role in fisheries and financial management. And hence we're delighted to include Madeline's work on women in fisheries in today's webinar. And I also believe that this research reveals a missing knowledge gap across the sector, and that includes both charities and the fishing industry in respect of understanding the impact on many other problems affecting the welfare and safety of fishers. I'll shortly hand over to Dr. Paul Jones from Liverpool John Moores to take you through the research findings. He'll be followed by Deborah Lade, our Grants Director at Seafarer UK, who will take us through the recommendations made in the research report and share our plans for creating a safety net to support the financial resilience of fishers and their families. The new research shows how in Seafarers UK's new strategy, launching in 2021, we'll be working differently to deliver positive and enduring change. We'll be working proactively in identifying and developing solutions that address the root cause of the problems. And we'll work with our delivery partners, maritime welfare charities, to create interventions. For fishers, we'll help enhance their financial security by creating their own safety net. But we can't do this alone. So we want to work collaboratively with you and others interested in the welfare of fishers to enhance the financial resilience of fishers and ensure they have access to adequate safety net in difficult times. So I urge you to engage and be involved in the work we're really excited to share with you. Thank you for listening to me. So I'm pleased to introduce you to Dr. Paul Jones, reader in social economy at Liverpool John Moores University. Paul is a leading expert on financial inclusion and has carried out an extensive work on different issues concerning the personal finance of low-income consumers. Paul is the researcher and author of Fishing Without a Safety Net. At the start of the research project, he was very well supported by Natasha Taylor, a research intern who gathered the data that forms the basis of this research. Natasha's internship was funded by the Fishmongers Company's Charitable Trust, and I'm delighted to inform you that this resulted in a full-time position as the fishing specialist caseworker at the Seafarers Advice and Information Line. So I'll now hand you over to Paul to take you through the key findings from the research.
Thank you, Catherine, and good morning, everybody. And as Catherine said, I'm Paul Anthony Jones from Liverpool John Moores University, and I'm the author of this report. And for the next 20 minutes, I'm going to take you through some of the key findings and conclusions of our study. I will be kind of doing this from time to time, which is a message to another Paul to move the slides on. I think really, though, to begin, we should really explain how we did this study, how it came about. The study actually was focused on a data analysis of the 431 anonymised records of service users of 3 charities. And these 3 charities are the Seafarers Advice and Information Line, SAIL, the Shipwrecked Mariners Society, the Seafarers Hospital Society. So we were looking at the data already captured by these charities on people working in the fishing industry. This was supported and strengthened by 39 semi-structured interviews. These were either face-to-face, on the phone, some on the quayside, speaking over, to fishers on their boats, and they included 19 fishers and 22 industry representatives. The reason why those 2 are a little bit more than 39 is because there is 2 people were both fishers and industry representatives. We did 14 case studies as well, where we looked in depth at the experiences of people who'd come to the charities for support. And these case studies were built up from the data and the recordings made by people in the charities. Some of these case studies, quite a number of them, are actually detailed and explained and developed in the report itself. We also had an overview of the anonymised business accounts of vessel owners who had applied for the European Maritime and Fisheries Fund grants through the Fishing Animateur Cornwall Rural Community Charity Organisation. So we had some idea of some of the applications for grants and some of the kind of financial situation people were coming from. And of course, this study was undertaken not just on its own, but in the context of the existing literature. And you'll see in the report there is quite an extensive bibliography, because we did learn from other organisations and other research reports that had already been done before ours. There are limitations, though, and I think we should recognize these limitations at the outset. But before I talk about the limitations, let me talk about one of the strengths, or the strength. And the strength was that this research focused on the real problems of people who'd sought advice, help, or hardship grants. So it's a reflection on the real problems that people have brought to the charities. But in terms of actually the field work, we were only able to do some in-depth work in 2 places, in Newlyn and in Whitehaven, in 2 ports only. And also there's a limited number of active fishers in the study. Our data records recorded 140 active fishers. And you might say, well, what about all the other people? Well, they were ex-fishers or retired or family members or widows or whatever. So this study, we would say, is indicative rather than exhaustive, but it does throw a clear light on the situation of people working in the fishing industry. The other limitation, of course, which is a big one, is that this study was undertaken before the pandemic of COVID-19. It doesn't undermine or take away from the conclusions or the findings of this study. For what we know afterwards is that these findings, the stresses and the strains in the industry are only exacerbated. They certainly have not gone away, but it was before COVID-19. As Catherine said at the beginning, my background is in financial services for people on low and moderate incomes and in the community finance credit union sector. I was new to fishing and it was great, and thanks Seafarers for asking Liverpool John Moores University to do this study. We know a lot more about the reality of life as a fisher. Life as a share fisher, though. I'll go take you through some of the kind of key themes of this report. One of the themes which was came out very, very strongly was that the inshore fishing industry is under significant strain. Even though businesses in any part of the fishing industry can fail for multiple reasons, you know, significant financial strain was most evident among the, at the time, the 4,137 inshore, mostly day boats and mostly under 10-meter long boats. The stories and the histories and the explanations that were given to us by fishers and people working in the industry confirm that this sector, for the most part, in terms of the inshore small scale sector, was under a lot of strain. And life as a share fisher, the report reveals some of the real financial realities and challenges. Share fishing actually is highly valued by inshore fishers. Lots of people like to be share fishers. They saw its value, and many people thought there was no other way of doing it. But the challenges and the downsides were very much appreciated. And this, of course, comes out of the interviews and the stories and the conversations that we had with fishers themselves. They spoke about the insecurity in the irregularity of income. Of course, a share fisher is what it says. You don't have a contract. You're not employed in the normal sense. Your income is a share of what you catch on that day. And that can be very uncertain, particularly at certain times of the year. It's also, as Catherine's already said, it's difficult to manage your financial affairs because you are responsible for the payment of tax and national insurance, not on this year, but on the previous year. You don't have holiday or sick pay like other people. And also you often lack insurance, and you certainly, for the most part, lack kind of adequate pension plans. So it is a very precarious way of working. And we did notice, and this isn't actually reported a great deal in the report, but more and more fishers were setting up as small businesses and as joint directors and partners, something that seems to be happening more now. Making ends meet on a low income. We talked a lot about this with people. Of course, income from fishing is highly variable, and some people are on high incomes. There's no doubt about it. We met people in Whitehaven, for example, who pre-COVID were making a good living from fishing, mostly of whelks at that time. But often, and as I've kind of referred to already, there was a significant number in the inshore fleet, often with smaller boats, often older boats, who were earning very little. And many of the fishers that we spoke to, and you'll see it in the case studies, were struggling on a low income, often dependent on partner earnings. I mean, that was story after story, how fishers depended on their partners, their wives or partners having another job. they couldn't make ends meet just from the fishing, or quite a few having to take a second job. Also putting a strain on a fisher's income was, restrictions restrictions on access to fishing opportunities. There, were more protected areas, quotas, loss of fishing stocks, prohibited species, prohibited areas, offshore wind farms and cables, as at Whitehaven, climate change, all sorts of things impacting on fishers, telling us, well, the fish aren't there as they used to be in the past. And people were struggling to make this industry pay. On top of that, there was, in terms of what people told us, there was a lack of access to markets. A lack of access to markets that paid sufficiently well, that is. And that was increasing the strain. From Whitehaven, fish were sent over to Lowestoft, often sent to Fleetwood. And sometimes fishers told us that, they'd send the fish to Fleetwood and it wouldn't get sold for some reason. Might have been a glut of that particular fish, whatever. And of course, even after fishing, even after catching, then there was still no income. Of course, what did this lead to? Well, what was very clear in the data that we were able to analyze with Natasha's help, as of course, it's already been mentioned, was actually access to a credit is fundamental to managing the ups and downs of this income stream. Access to credit, like in many lower income households, credit is a necessity, not just an option. And there was evidence from the data sets that there were significant borrowings, flexible borrowings on overdrafts and credit cards and from high cost lenders, less actually from mainstream banks. So borrowing was an important part of life as a fisher. And what did this lead to? It led to quite a lot of over indebtedness. And in fact, when we looked at the data records, the main reason that most fishers gave for seeking advice from those charities and from sale or seeking financial support was over indebtedness. Of the 140 active fishers in the data sets, 63% were there seeking help about debt problems. Of the fishers currently working at that time, 70% had debt problems. And of those, 84% of those people had difficulty repaying priority debts. Come back to priority debts later. But of course, priority debts are those debts that have significant consequences rather than other non-priority debts. These are the debts like rent, mortgage, council tax, TV license, gas and electricity that can have a negative impact, can lead actually to fines and lead even to imprisonment. These are the really important debts, and most of the debts were priority debts. We also of course, we also, not everybody was a working fisher in our data sets. Some were on, sorry, not all the working fishers were actually working. Some of them were on sick leave. And what was really remarkable, that 42% said that they had zero income. I'll come back to the issue of welfare benefits later, but they actually had zero income. They were managing on nothing. Of the 70% of this group received advice from sale, and 83% received benefit advice, 43% received debt advice. So it's all about financial advice that people were seeking. More on over indebtedness. Fishers and rent arrears. Actually, most fishers live in private rented accommodation. It's often difficult and has been difficult in the past, given the insecure and the volatility of income, actually to get a mortgage. Some people do, of course, some people do, but it's not always that easy. Therefore, 62% of all the active fishers lived in private rented accommodation, and 37% of them, which is quite a high number, had rent arrears. So they were coming with rent arrears. Of the retired fishers, or the people not working at this time who were also in the data sets, many on pension credit and suffering health problems, 57% receiving pension credit. We know that indicates that there's not been, the ability to provide really well for retirement. And only 13 out of the 84 retired fishers in the data sets, that's only 16%, said that they had an occupational pension. Also in the data sets were widows of fishers, and they had debt and financial problems too. 30% of the widows were under 60 years of age, which was kind of significant. But 67% of them had debts. 48% had their financial problem caused by a recent death, and 38% had their financial problem caused by a death at sea. So we're able to reveal some of the reasons for over-indebtedness amongst widows of fishermen. And this was an amazing little figure at the bottom here. And again, as we say, this is indicative. This research is indicative. And this figure just came from the records held by the charities. Of the 53 single fishers, the average income per annum, as revealed by themselves to the charities, was 7,229. Health. Well, as Catherine's already mentioned, a lot of the stresses and strains of being, for some, of being a share fisher, not all, of course, we're not saying it's all, it's that it is significant. Over a quarter of all fishers said that they suffered from poor mental health. That's from the data sets, but actually that was confirmed through the conversations and the dialogue, through the interviews with the fishers themselves. Out of all the 341 fishers, 27% that they had mental health issues, and 63 of these had problem debts. There was a link between the stress and the strain on people's mental health and financial worries, not just financial worries about the income, but financial worries about accounting for tax and national insurance and all the kind of things that you have to do as well to manage the kind of working budget. Health and well-being came out a lot, and this kind of went further than finance. But people spoke about their back pain issues and the general deterioration in health, which, as Catherine's already said, didn't stop people going to sea, even when they should not. This is a financial issue. They couldn't go to the doctors or the dentist because going to sea was an economic necessity, because there was no sick pay. There was if you're a share fisher, if you don't fish, you don't get a share of the income. And all of this was impacting on relationships and family life. So 86% of retired fishers had health problems. A high level of accidents and physical illness caused by fishing was exemplified in the number of fishers, working or not, making claims for employment support allowance and personal independence payment. Lack of affordable credit. This was key. A lack of affordable credit is a major issue, particularly for boat owners. People who need to replace pots and nets lost at sea, to purchase essential equipment and gear, and to repair and upgrade boats. The lack of affordable credit is what sends people off looking for expensive, high cost, often extortionate credit. A very positive, which has been mentioned already, a very positive intervention in this study, through the period of this study, was the creation of the Affordable Credit Facility for Fishers in Cornwall. This, as we've already mentioned, has already been mentioned, this was through a Seafarers UK grant to Cornwall Credit Union in Cornwall. Quite a small operation in many ways, but with significant kind of outcomes. Of that 30k loan guarantee fund, it was a loan guarantee fund, very little was put into administrative expenses. That turned into, through the period of this project, £172,000, more than £172,000 worth of loans loaned to fishers, with no defaults on lending prior to COVID-19. Of course, COVID-19 makes things different. We've explored a lot financial capability and money management through this study. And of course, what was very clear in speaking to the fishers and from the data, but living on a share fisher's uncertain income depends actually on a high level of financial capability and forward planning, skills that sometimes fishers do lack. And in fact, we did come across fishers who, lack basic skills in literacy and numeracy. Therefore, to have a higher level of financial capability often was not there. And that led to further stresses and strains. So being a share fisher demands a greater level of financial literacy, capability, and formal planning than is required of most employees with a regular tax paid at source wage, which also includes automatic enrollment for pensions as well, entitlement to sick and holiday pay. If you're a share fisher, you don't have any of that. On top of it, there is a culture of share fishing that was revealed through the stories of people, both fishing now and in the past, about the living for today. That actually managing the money is a bit of a challenge for quite a lot of people. For example, saving on a fishing income demands resilience. But as one fisher said, you've got to be pretty tough on yourself to put cash away. And of course, quite a few people were not that tough. The need for advice and financial support, of course, the seeking advice and financial problems. This I've already mentioned. This was what came out through the report. People receiving advice from sale, mostly receiving benefits advice and debt advice and advice about housing. But actually, in comparison with sale as a part of the Citizens Advice Service, actually sale has got a higher proportion of people coming to it about financial problems than the normal Citizen Advice Service in the country that tends to have a higher proportion of consumer issues. And one thing that was really kind of interesting and kind of revealing through this study, actually knowledge about and promotion of the sale service around advice actually was increased within the fishing community. And there was a significant rise in the number of people coming to sale for advice. So the highest number of both unique and new clients seen in the quarter prior to COVID-19, showing that there is a real need for advice around financial problems in this sector. Of course, there's also issues around access to welfare benefits. And I'm kind of running out of time, but I must say this actually needs stressing. That the welfare benefit system, actually, particularly with the introduction of universal credit, and of course I've got a reference here to job seekers allowance, doesn't quite fit the life of a share fisher. The 5 weeks wait, well, you might be back to sea again before 5 weeks. The job seekers allowance, having to be available for work, but that, and seeking another job, but if you're off because of the weather, it doesn't quite fit. But we did learn that in years ago, there used to be a fisherman's stamp that they used to, in years gone by in the 90s, that their fishermen would actually get support through difficult times of bad weather and repairs and all that kind of thing. But over the time, that has disappeared. Access to grants, financial support came through as a really important, vital importance of hardship grants to support fishers through difficult times. And the sterling work of the Fisherman's Mission was remarkable. People spoke of the high value of that. But one of the kind of rubs on this was that for example, the European Maritime and Fisheries Fund at the time, which did give grants, but you had to buy the equipment in advance and then claim the grant on the production of invoices. But people didn't have the money to buy the purchase, to purchase equipment in advance and then claim it back. And of course, that's what a lot of the grants in the credit union project were used for. Well, I'm on my last slide now and run down. I think I'm just on time. Yes, time's up. But let's just to say, the aim of this study was to enable maritime welfare charities, government and other agencies to better respond to the financial situation of fishers. And what it reveals is that it is complex. This financial situation is complex and it needs interventions on multiple levels And the key themes where interventions are required on money and debt advice, on access to grants that are actually serviceable, on financial education and money management. There needs to be a greater collaboration amongst fishers. We've talked in the report about a fishers cooperative, which I know is going to be addressed in a few minutes. And also the evolution of a share fishing model. We talk about Share Fisher Plus. What does Share Fisher Plus means? It means keeping the advantages being a share fisher, but having a collaborative, cooperative approach to supporting share fishers manage their money and managing their finances better. Of course, we need an action plan for the sector, and we need for a safety net. Of course, that's the title of the report. Fishers often didn't have this safety net, and they need it. So the reality and dynamics of life as a share fisher present a wide range of structural challenges that need to be addressed in order to improve their financial stability. And now I'm going to pass over to Deborah, who's the Grants Director of Seafarers UK, who's going to talk about the actual recommendations of this report.
Deborah, can I ask you to unmute, please? You might want to start again. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thanks, Deborah. That sounds better.
Sorry, apologies about that. So just to start again then, I'm Deborah Lay, Grants Director, and I'm going to take you through the Fishing Without a Safety Net Research Report's recommendations. In total, there are 10 recommendations. 6 relate to policy changes, which require influencing and working with government to make changes, and 4 are charity interventions, which we would look to fund ourselves and with others. In terms of the policy recommendations, you can see in the report the 6 policy recommendations, and I wish to explain a little more about what we see as the challenging questions that we need to explore within these recommendations. For example, Recommendation 5 relates to a national action plan, and the question there is there a collective representative voice focused on the welfare of small-scale fishers and their communities to take forward this national action plan? Recommendation 6 relates to encouraging new entrants into the industry, and the question here is, would fishing be a more attractive career if new entrants were guaranteed a minimum wage and basic protections? Recommendation 7 is a fair price for fish. Can this be achieved, and what would be the impact on consumers? Recommendation 8 deals with the HMRC and tax payments, and having read the report, you might be surprised to know that the HMRC Share Fisher budget scheme closed only in January of this year. We need to understand why that was. Was it lack of awareness or promotion of the scheme? It seems that this could have been something that was really helpful and useful to help fishers. Recommendation 8 looks at auto-enrollment of pensions. And here we have to ask the question, why is this not something that exists in the fishing industries as a whole? And recommendation 10 is about the welfare benefit reform. And this, of course, is a massive challenge. This is something where we have common cause with representative organisations who represent the self-employed and gig economy workers, very similar to the share fishing model, as well as those within and outside the fishing industries. As Paul has said, we cannot achieve this on our own. So these are questions that we are still exploring, still looking at, still working out how to move them forward. So if you have thoughts on what the right answers are or any additional questions, please get in touch with us. Hopefully today's webinar will be a catalyst for good ideas and sharing. So we recognise that the policy recommendations are extremely ambitious and challenging, and thus we need the involvement of all of the different parts of the fishing industries. As one of my trustees commented, we will not have got the recommendations right, but they are a good place to start to move forward. We need the fishing industry, we need its representative bodies, vessel owners, crew, and to support and back these recommendations in order to achieve fairness in fishing. We also, of course, need the buyers and sellers of fish, including the big supermarkets. And we are already discussing with DEFRA how we can connect with relevant people in other government departments in order to make the case. To take forward some of these policy recommendations, we're exploring ideas around the development of a sign-up campaign to pledge support for fairness in fishing. This is another big idea that we are potentially taking forward. And again, we'd like your feedback and to work with you on this. So what the report is really saying is if you are, like me, a PAYE employee, there are many benefits and protections that we take for granted. For example, the regularity of income payments and the amount of money you get on a monthly basis. Also, the legal requirements for a national minimum wage to be paid. Also, a legal requirement for auto enrolment into a pension scheme. And of course, not to mention, it's a very tax efficient way of making longer term savings. We also have our income tax and national insurance deducted at source. We don't even have to think about this or plan and budget, it just happens. We also benefit from having national insurance and pension contributions paid by our employer, which obviously helps build our future provision for state and personal pension. We benefit from paid holiday and sickness leave, whereas the majority of share fishers, do not have any of these at all. We recognise that share fishing can give big rewards for labour and effort, but is it really fair that share fishers should risk their lives and provide their labour without basic benefits and protections that others take for granted? So we have to ask the question, who is providing a safety net for fishers? And you'll see from the diagram on the screen that there is a difference between what would be ideal within the sector and what the reality as it is now. Ideally, we would recognise that the individual fisher is responsible for their own personal finance needs, but in reality, for many, it is often charities that carry the largest load and who are making the biggest contribution. This is not necessarily positive for fishers, as fishers have pride in their work and want to be responsible for their own needs, whereas at the moment they have little or no choice but to fall back on charities when faced with an accident, an injury, or an illness that prevents them from earning an income through fishing. So what are we going to do in order to create a safety net? Well, the report makes 4 key recommendations for charity intervention that can help build a safety net. Just to highlight these 4 recommendations, these are the ones that we are considering funding. Access to a credit union, enhancing financial capability, providing a single point of access to a range of financial services using a cooperative share fisher type of approach, and also raising awareness of existing charitable support. And on this, I will say, thank you very much to DEFRA, whose comms and stakeholder and engagement teams during COVID have been incredibly helpful in promoting the range of charitable support that exists for fishers. So, since July of this year, we've been working on a feasibility study to explore ideas contained within this report with both industry stakeholders and key individuals. We're really grateful to those 25 key individuals who generously gave of their time to explore ideas and give us feedback. Their feedback has been invaluable, and it has meant that we have learnt and evolved and made changes along the way. So our recommendation on the credit union would enable fishers to have access to a UK-wide credit union. So what would this do for fishers? It would provide a savings facility for fishers, but it would also provide access to affordable loans for both personal and business needs. Paul, of course, referenced this, and that many of the existing loans are very high interest loans. We would also like the credit union to provide a budgeting or a jam jar account. This helps for planning and budgeting for specific items. It can be used for, in this case, it can be used for tax and national insurance. At the end of the financial year, these jam jar account monies that have been regularly saved over the year are transferred into the bill payment account, and the money is then paid over to the HMRC. Of course, we're hoping that we might be successful in persuading the HMRC to reinstate their budgeting scheme. That would also be incredibly useful for fishers. As Paul has mentioned, the idea for a credit union builds on the 3-year pilot project that we had in Cornwall. We awarded a grant of £30,000 as the loan guarantee fund so that the credit union members' savings were not exposed to the risk of funding a new and unknown market, aka fishers. So far, that 30,000 has been lent almost 6 times, £172,124 in loans to 28 fishers. And I'm delighted to say that as of last week, there have been no loan defaults on that amount over 3 years. And this demonstrates that fishers, when given realistic interest rates and payment terms, can work within these structures. Moving on to the next recommendations. Financial capability. Now, this aspect has 3 strands to it. First strand is an industry-wide campaign. Second, an informal one-to-one learning in local ports. And the third is going upstream and getting it right by starting at the start by training new entrants. So in terms of industry-wide, we're looking at a campaign to encourage fundamental behavioural change. We want to move from boom and bust and short-term plans to long-term financial planning and resilience. This cultural shift is incredibly important. Within the campaign, which will be primarily visual to appeal with a wider range of fishers, we'll be promoting the credit union and raising awareness of SAIL, Seafarers Advice and Information Line, as a source of help and support for fishers. We think it is important too to make the link with women, given that women can often be the ones who manage the paperwork, family's budget, and who may also be involved in supporting the fishing business. The one-to-one learning in local fishing ports builds on the idea of train the trainer. This is when you take key trusted frontline workers and give them training and enough information that they feel enabled to pass on this information as the need arises. This approach recognises that classroom-based learning may not be the best method for some fishers, and that informal peer support could be more beneficial. So what we are endeavouring to do is get it right at the start, upstream training. We're already talking to Seafish about their training programme for new entrants and also approaching their training providers. Also speaking with organisations like Fishing Into the Future and other training providers to see if we can get a 1-hour module of formal classroom training for fishers who are willing to be trained and hear new information at the very start of their career in fishing. Very importantly, all resources will be freely available, and there'll be also an online and digital app. Now we come to the biggest recommendation of all, which is providing access to appropriate financial products. The idea is about there being a single point of access to a range of appropriate, reasonably priced financial products. And this approach recognises that fishers don't want to spend time comparing T's and C's or reading small print or form filling, but it also recognises that many insurers regard fishers on fishing as being a dangerous profession and price high for that risk. So therefore, we recognise that we need to do more to help insurers understand the steps that have been taken over the last few years to make fishing a lot less dangerous and a lot safer. We see the advantages of a share fisher-owned cooperative as providing a missing gap by provision of appropriate financial services for fishers, and this would include access to appropriate insurances, pensions and other products for fishers. We hope that doing this through a cooperative would provide a benefit of group purchasing, which helps to reduce the price that an individual fisher would have to pay otherwise. In the report, it recommends that Seafarers UK acts as a sponsor, and since July, we've been actively exploring through a feasibility study what that would mean for Seafarers UK if we act as a sponsor, and how we could develop a bespoke financial package for fishers, in effect to create a safety net that would support the financial resilience of fishers. In the diagram, you can see those elements. The credit union, the group purchasing, and the need to provide a women's network for knowledge exchange and peer support for those women who are often the bedrock of many fishing families. So what are we doing? What are we doing by launching the safety net? Is starting a debate with the sector about how we create the safety net. We have some big ideas, some great ambitions, plans, but what we are clear about is there are missing gaps in the support needed to enhance fishers' financial resilience. We're absolutely committed to taking this forward at Seafarers UK, and we have started to discuss the ideas with the national associations and key stakeholders, but we really wish to hear your ideas too. Please speak to us. The contact details are on the slide or of course on our website, but we need to build a safety net, a financial safety net for fishers together. This is so very important. Let's aim to create a roadmap to financial resilience. We know we can do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, firstly, my thanks to Paul for his eye-opening presentation, which painted a fairly bleak picture, and to Deborah for describing our ambitious and exciting plans, which demonstrate great opportunities for collaboration in building the safety net. In taking forward the recommendations, I believe there is potential to make real change to strengthen the financial resilience of fishers. Well, as we're a charity and we care about your welfare, we've included a comfort break today, which is your opportunity to add your questions to the Q&A section for the last session today and with our panel of speakers. But you can also do some virtual networking through our chat function, which I know we're all missing that in these days of webinar and COVID. So please take the chance to do that. During the break, there will be a film loop of photos of fisherwomen. And when we return at 11:05, Craig Easton will share some more photos of fisherwomen and talk about his inspiration for his fisherwomen's portrait photography project. So goodbye for now, and we'll see you in 10 minutes time. In 5 minutes time. Thank you.
Fisher Women is a project that has developed over 7 years to explore and celebrate the role of women in the fishing industry. And one of my key aims with the work is to make the connection between the contemporary experience of fisher women with the great tradition of going back centuries and centuries. Women, as we know, have always been integral to the fishing industry, and back in the day when they were all well-known characters visible outdoors, gutting and packing fish on the quayside, they were a source of inspiration to artists and photographers. Indeed, the earliest social documentary photographs made anywhere in the world were the portraits that Hill and Adamson made when they took their bulky studio camera out into the streets of New Haven near Edinburgh and photographed fisherwomen back in the early 1840s. This was just 4 years after the invention of photography. And then later on, at the end of the century, artists such as the great American modernist Winslow Homer made wonderful paintings of fisherwomen in colour coats near Newcastle, and John McGee painted fisher girls in Fife. And so they were recognised and celebrated, and the stories of the herring girls are well known as the travelling band of female-only workers that are really a unique phenomenon in the history of British working life. And so knowing this history and being aware of the representation of fishing over the last 100 years or so, I was aware that it had focused almost uniquely on fishermen, with photographs and paintings of the heroic trawlermen at sea. And I wanted to put that right. And so in 2013 I started knocking on doors and making portraits of women working in processing factories and smokehouses in Aberdeenshire. Then as the work progressed and knowing that it was the connection to the past that I wanted to celebrate, I began to visit former herring girls, now mostly in their 80s and 90s, of course, and I would interview them and record their stories and make portraits on this big old 1950s wooden plate camera. And it was both a joy and a privilege to be able to record these stories and meet these women, and I felt a real sense of responsibility that these memories and these lives needed to be documented, since the tradition of going to the gutting had really started to die out in the 50s and 60s. And these were the last of that generation. The last barrels of herring were packed in Lerwick in Shetland in 1974. But I was determined that the project was not a nostalgic look at the industry, and so throughout I continued to make the portraits of contemporary fisherwomen. And by following the route of the traditional herring fleet from Shetland to Great Yarmouth, I was able to tie in these three strands together: the heritage, the journey, and the contemporary portraits. And here's just a tiniest of flavours of some of the stories I've recorded.
I worked with my cousin, and we did all the gutting of the fish, tied up with fingers, and the lorry that fetched us came and picked us up, took us home at night when it was finished. And we enjoyed that. We didn't. Sometimes we got a bit fed up with the work. Hans was that dirty and that, but we made up for it when we went to the parley at night. We had good times. Every Saturday night, dancing.
I've always had this life. I've always worked with fish. Definitely fishing there's a lot more history, a lot more, I say respect amongst everybody, but I don't know, it's just a part of who I am, and I've never looked at any other way because it's who I am. And you get a lot of people, even now, that they don't like the smell of fish. If you go anywhere near them, it's like, ugh. And they don't want nothing to do, and you're like, you know what, you don't actually know how to work for a living, because working in a fish house is hard work. People don't realise that. It is, anybody who works in a fish house or has done, you'll know, because they've got back problems, knee problems, hand problems, there's all sorts. But there was nothing ever wasted in a fish house, nothing. Even like the bones and all that lot, it all went to, I think it went to Spain. Nothing was ever wasted in a fish house, nothing. Anybody who works with fish, especially the women, they are hard workers, but they're friendly, they're helpful, they'll sing, they'll laugh and joke about everything, but if you cross them, woe betide you.
So welcome back, and I think Craig Easton might be in the audience with us today. So I want to say a really big thank you to Craig for sharing your exceptional photographs with us. Thank you very much. But it's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Madeleine Gustafsson, who is a research fellow at the University of Exeter, to tell you more about her work looking at the role of women in fisheries. Over to you, Madeleine.
Hi there, I hope you can hear me well. Thanks so much for inviting me to speak today, and thanks to everyone that has been talking earlier. Really interesting, and also obviously I love the photos that was just presented by Craig there. So I was invited to speak today about my research project on women in fisheries. And more specifically to comment on some of the work, part of the project around sort of the financial resilience of that women contribute to fishing families. This work was funded by the Economics and Social Research Council and was conducted at the University of Exeter. So my title, my presentation is titled "An Informal Safety Net?" ? Sorry, I'm getting used to this. So if you want to know more about the wider research project, we have a website, which is women-fisheries.com, and you can find more information on that. So when we start thinking through the sort of contributions that women do towards the financial resilience of fishing families and fishing businesses, we need to sort of start by shifting the perspective. And we need to think about fishing as more than capturing fish. And we need to think about this sort of context in which fishing takes place. And that is not always, but often in sort of fishing families. And when I'm talking about fishing families, I'm not necessarily limiting that to the sort of multi-generational families, but can be any kind of family, be that they started fishing a couple of years ago or not. Or had been doing that for much longer time. And within the context of families, I found that women make very important contributions to these 5 key areas. One is that they're hidden decision makers of families. They contribute to the financial capability of fishing enterprises. They are unpaid, invisible, under-recognized workers in fishing enterprises. Sometimes, and they often contribute to sort of independent incomes to families, and they can also be entrepreneurs. So I will explain all of these things a bit more in detail. So when I'm saying that women are often hidden decision makers in families, I'm saying that because if you speak to fishermen, they would often say that they're very independent, but sometimes they're not always as independent as they say they are. Some research, which I was involved with, also found that women make choices, are part of making decisions about sort of everyday to more sort of strategic long-term directions of fishing family businesses. And the report is talking about that fishers sometimes have poor financial skills and capabilities. And I think here I wanted to highlight that in some families, not all, obviously, women are filling this gap. So women often have other forms of knowledge, which is associated with their often very different sort of life experiences, sometimes their professional life experiences as well. And I wanted to show a quote here, which is by a participant, which I've called Louise. That's not her real name. I've been using pseudonyms. And she's talking about her taking on a very supportive role, doing sort of the administration, finances, and paperwork. And then she is, at the end of this quote, she's saying, you can't be expected to jump on a boat, on a computer, and go out to sea. It's the same way as I wouldn't ever considering getting up on board the boat and taking it out of the harbour, let alone finding wrecks and shooting gears. They're two completely separate spheres. Whilst this is really kind of interesting, I'm by no means sort of suggesting that this should be the job of women. And it has to be sort of a choice. As you can see, Louise here is kind of positioning her work as equally important to that, which is capturing fish at sea, which is very interesting. But in some cases, my work also shows that this paperwork things that women tend to do is more out of sort of necessity than a pure kind of something that empowers them or they feel joy about doing. And another thing I wanted to highlight here, and this was taken from the report that we've been discussing this morning, is that this sort of skills that women sometimes bring to the table can be lost after potentially a divorce, and therefore sort of fishers can find themselves even more vulnerable. Another theme that my research uncovered was that women often make important contributions, economic contributions, through their sort of their employment, which is not tied to fisheries. And this often offer stable incomes. It enables fishers to fish and is sometimes subsidizing partners fishing. And it can be particularly important at particular times. For example, if there has been an accident or there's been declining incomes from fishing due to changes in the markets, policy, or sort of environmental issues and the availability of fish, for example. So again, I've got some quotes here to just illustrate these findings. So Amanda, the first quote here, is talking about a particular point in time where there had been an accident at sea. Her partner had had lost the boat, basically. And that during that time, when he was recovering and he was suffering from depression, they lived off her money. She says, this was really tight. For 3 months, it was really tight, but I couldn't force him to go back to sea. But we just did it. We just coped. We didn't have takeaways. We didn't have luscious food. We didn't have a meal out. So that sort of demonstrates how women are very much involved in managing money, but also helping with the well-being, basically. And then on the right-hand side, you see Julie, who's talking about her partner's income being very low. He's got a part-time wage, and a lot of people couldn't stand it. And her income is offering a stable income. I'm going to skip to the next slide, please. And I also wanted to say that women can sometimes be innovators and add value to fishing products by what I call sort of being entrepreneurs in the fishing industry. And whilst this can sort of bring a lot of joy to women and be very empowering in some ways, it can also sustain the fishing industry over time. So we have, for example, Sandra here, who sells the fish catch of her partner. She's saying, because the boat costs a lot to run and sometimes they don't earn that amount to run it, so I subsidize that, really. Another function of this kind of entrepreneurship is that there will often be sort of they can secure better and more reliable prices for the fish of their family members. So at the end here, I just wanted to sort of pose some questions. And so what does it mean to be fishing with an informal safety net? As I've shown, women are part of this safety net for sure. But I also wanted to ask sort of more complicated questions around, should it really be the job of women in fishing families to keep sort of fishing afloat in this way, and fishing families and fishing businesses? Is that really fair? And whose job is it? And I think the report points to some ways forward, and we can discuss that maybe if you have any questions. And then there are questions around sort of, do women deserve formalized recognition in fishing? For example, in France, they have something which is called a collaborative spouse status, which affords you access to different types of rights, maternity rights and pensions. And how should women be included in fisheries policies? How can women be supported by external actors, be that government or charities or anything like this? These are questions we have to think about. And then to sort of conclude, is it really resilient to fish with this sort of informal safety net? Well, there are clear limitations to the resilience of this arrangement. For example, in the case of a divorce, as the report reveals. Just the final slide, please. So if you want to know more about this work, you can go on the website, which is women-fisheries.com, and we have a policy brief that you can download there, or you can contact me to get a proper hard copy if you want. Or if you're a woman that are involved in the industry somehow and you want to join a network for women in the UK fishing industry, there is a Facebook group called UK Women in Fisheries. Thank you very much.
Madeline, thank you very much for that thought-provoking presentation, which I think shows another of the hidden costs of fishing. So thank you. Our final presenter is Miles Cowley, the manager at the Seafarers Advice and Information Line, who will bring the research up to date now by sharing how sail has helped fishers during the COVID-19 lockdown. So over to you, Miles.
Thank you, and thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Miles, manager at Sail. Oh, you've got me on full screen. That's a real Brucey bonus for you this morning. For those of you not familiar with Sail, we're a free advice service helping fishers across the UK. We're part of Citizens Advice, and we have 10 paid advisors. I'm going to talk today about our experience of fishers during COVID. I'm going to break that down into 3 sections. Firstly, what we've seen. Secondly, what that's shown us. And thirdly, what might come next. First of all, we should acknowledge before we start that there are many fishermen who do organise their finances very well. However, those are generally not the fishermen who contact us here at Sail. So first of all, what have we seen? If we could have slide 1, please. Okay, so this is shows a fisherman contacting Sail for the first time. Of course, they're contacting mostly because they had no income and no savings. The blue line on the top represents fishermen contacting us the first time in 2020, and the orange line below the average for 2018 and 2019. You can clear, it's not too surprising, you can see a clear spike in demand for our services in March, April and May. At one point, at its peak, we were helping around 10 times as many clients, 10 times as many fishermen as we would do normally. A couple of points to note, although it doesn't show it very well on the chart here, the winter of 2019-20 wasn't a great one for the fishing industry. The weather was very poor, and we did have historical high numbers of fishermen contacting Sail before COVID. And secondly, since the end of May, the numbers have returned right back to normal, and that's in line with the grant-giving charities in the fishing sector. And what did we advise those fishermen on? If we could have slide number 2. So this is a pie chart showing what we advised on in the fishermen in those 3 months. The blue section is entitled Benefits, but it includes both regular benefits and the government support scheme, and that clearly dominates, with debt and charity grants making up the top 3. Breaking down the blue section a little bit more, in terms of regular benefits, universal credit clearly dominated. There were 2 main problems with universal credit. Firstly, the widely reported problem that it was essentially overwhelmed by demand. The application process itself was very difficult and very long, and obviously the payments were not quick. Secondly, universal credit includes household income, so it's not particularly good for fishers whose partners work. If fishermen who paid national insurance contributions were able to apply for New Star JSA, which job seekers allowance, which doesn't include partner income. With regard to the government schemes, not many of the fishermen who contacted us didn't qualify. Most usually because they didn't pay tax and national insurance. Although we did have some good numbers applying for the self-employment income support scheme, the SEISS. How does this pie chart differ from normal? Well, as you'd expect, the benefits in the circumstances, the benefits were higher than normal, and debt lower, primarily because the government stopped creditors from chasing non-payers of debt repayments. That's changing now. We'll come on to that in a second. And we're done with that slide. Some positives, I think, from what we've seen. First of all, the numbers going back to normal implies that the welfare charities have done a reasonable job in getting fishers over the initial problems with COVID. Second, the value of paying national insurance and tax has been demonstrated to fishers because the government schemes for those were more generous. And the fact that each of the 4 nations put pots of money available for the fishing industry in itself shows the value of the industry. What might come next? The final section. Well, the balance sheet of the UK fishing industry has clearly been whacked by COVID. Government support schemes are now tapering off, and creditors can now chase non-payers. So landlords and mortgage companies can start evictions, and bailiffs can visit homes. So it won't take a massive further shock in the fishing industry for a large number of fishers to develop severe debt problems. We should be very clear here. Share fishermen with incomes going up and down massively week to week are at a real disadvantage in terms of budgeting and debt repayments. I think that's going to be the main challenge for the welfare sector in the next 6 months. Before I finish, one final request, if I may. SAIL is trying to help as many fishermen across the UK as possible. Of course, we're not a massive organisation, so we do depend on people, on you nudging or even shoving fishermen our way. I thank you all who do that already, and especially the Fishermen's Mission, who we work really closely with. If anyone has any ideas about how we could raise the awareness of our service amongst the fishing community, I'd be delighted to speak to you. Please do get in touch via Seafarers UK, and I'll catch up with you either tomorrow or next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Miles, and all of your team at SAIL for the really fantastic work that you do supporting fishers. It's really comforting for us at Seafarers UK to know that we can refer seafarers to you, and SAIL will help them find a way forward. It's now time for our Q&A. I'd like to thank Barry Dees from the National Federation of Fishermen's Organisations for agreeing to join our panel today. And I now ask all panelists to turn on your video, but please remain muted. I will now remain as a panelist, but hand you over to Harriet Yates-Smith from the Mindfully Wired team, who've done a really great job in supporting our webinar today. So over to you, Harriet.
Thank you so much, Catherine, and thank you so much for everyone's presentations. It was really excellent. I'm going to start with the most upvoted question, and just a reminder to everyone that you can upvote your questions by using the little thumbs up button, and you can still put questions in the Q&A and we will get through as many as we can. So the first question is from Derek Cardinaux, and it is, as many of the recommendations are very ambitious in the report, would a consideration be given to look at doing regionalised approach? The UK fishing industry is very widespread with different challenges. And I think Deborah is gonna jump on this one.
Okay, thank you for the question, Derek. Yes, absolutely. I think we need to take a regional approach, and again, it's by working with organisations such as your own, the Scottish Fishing Federation and the NFFO and others, in terms of getting advice and guidance on how best to do that. So yeah, absolutely, let's do that. Any comments, Barry?
Well, I mean, I think it's true to say that, especially when you're dealing with the small scale sector, we're dealing with a very fragmented, geographically dispersed sector that has got different target species, different gears, different interests, different business models. So I think we need an umbrella approach, but then I think we need to take into account the regional, local differences. So this is just part of the challenge, I think, that we face. So I don't think this is a simple answer. I think we need to provide the framework at national level, and I think that's the right focus. But then I think we wouldn't be able to deliver if we didn't take into account the local and the regional dimension.
Thank you, Barry. Okay, so on to the next question. The next question is from Ken Smith, and it's, to what extent does the high-risk environment of small boat fishing contribute to the attitudes of fishers and their families? The accident rate in small vessels is truly awful and unacceptable today. What greater expenditure on safety measures would greater expenditure on safety measures ease worries? Who would like to take this question?
I'll have a go if you like. I mean, the casualty rate in the small scale sector is higher. Big strides have been made in reducing the casualty rate overall, but that has made more progress in the over 10 metre sector. The MCA are about to launch a consultation, or have launched a consultation focused on exactly that point. How do we deliver a safety culture and safety measures that ensure that fishermen get home, in line with the campaign. So there are challenges there, and the linkage between the safety culture, the economic performance of the sector, the regulatory environment, representative organizations. I think this is they're all interlinked, and I think they have to be understood as being interlinked. But all I can say is it's recognized as one of the major challenges we have on the safety and training front at the moment.
Thank you, Barry. Okay, the next question is from Jonathan Hurd. And Jonathan says, the majority of fishers Stella Maris supported this year were foreign fishers working in the domestic fishing fleet, as often they were unable to access local services or support. As the percentage of overseas fishers within our fleets grows, what efforts were made to engage with this group for the report, and what recommendation do you have to support them specifically? And I'm going to ask this to Paul.
Okay, well, thanks, Jonathan, for your question. And of course, the number of foreign fishers operating and working in the British fleet came up time and time again. But of course, what I need to stress is that this research was based on the data of those fishers that had come to those charities that I mentioned in my report, the 3 charities. So it was mainly the fishers that had come seeking either advice or grant support. And among those fishers, we didn't come across any foreign fishers at all. So the answer, to the question about what efforts were made to engage with this group for the report, well, we didn't engage with that group particularly, apart from the stories and the evidence that the fishers that did come to us did give us, and they did have worries about foreign fishers in the fleet, particularly in the offshore fleet, on the larger vessels, how they often were not kind of treated in a way that maybe as fair as it could be. So it's an area for much greater research, I think. It's a big issue, but it's not the big issue that came up in our study, but it was there on the margins. I see Miles is going to add to that.
Yeah, I would just reiterate Paul's comment. The data came from 3 charities, ours, Shipwrecked Mariners and Seafarers Hospital Society. We have a theme of advising on UK rules and regulations. So that's going to, by necessity, limit the interaction we have with foreign nationals. Although we do give some immigration advice, you would have seen that on the pie chart that I showed earlier. But Shipwrecked Mariners and SHS are here, I can't speak for them, but are primarily supporting UK residents. So almost by definition, the number of foreign nationals would be rather limited.
Thank you, Miles. And I think Catherine's going to add something as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Harriet. I mean, I think firstly, it's a great question. ISWAN, who we also fund, do a lot of work with migrant fishers, but it's an area that we would like to know about, and we really welcome more information and more collaboration and the opportunity to work with delivery partners to find out more. But if you want us to work more in this area and you have information that you think would allow us to create some interesting research, then do please get in touch.
Thanks, Catherine. And Deborah?
Yeah, just to say that obviously the Fishermen's Mission also work in this area, and indeed we have supported them where they've worked in this area. And Stella Maris and the Fishermen's Mission in the northeast of Scotland are working together. And Stella Maris and Fishermen's Mission have been dealing with a variety of these quite awful cases in some instances. And so there are people out there supporting them, but perhaps it does go under the radar. And yes, it certainly wasn't addressed in the report, but it is something that absolutely is picked up by the key welfare charities around the coast.
Okay, thank you, Deborah. And Paul?
Yeah, just to add one final comment about it is that one comment that we got often from fishers themselves in reflecting on the number of foreign nationals, particularly in the offshore fleet, in the bigger vessels, was questions around why are there so many, why are there so many non-UK nationals working in the sector, where if the sector actually offered a good career prospect for UK workers, why aren't there more people working on those boats, and so on. So there was a whole range of questions around, why is the British fleet so dependent on Ghanaians and Filipinos and people from all over the world, so they wanted to know why their sons were not got attracted to that life. But we didn't write about it much in the report, but it did come up in conversations.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, and now the next in the Q&A is from Chris Ranford. It's not a question, but I'm going to leave it there because he talks about the benefits of the Kernow Credit Union and some really great insights there. So I'm going to leave that there, but I'm going to nip down to the next question, which is from Andrew Locker. And Andrew says, is there a place for a training course on financial training built into the basic training course programme? And then I think I'm going to ask that to Barry.
Sorry, was that directed to me?
Yes, that was. Thank you.
Yes, I mean, I think the if I heard you right, and Andrew's question right, is there a place for financial literacy training course within the general safety and increasingly welfare dimension of training? And I think the answer has to be yes. I think that the Fishermen's Welfare Alliance is very much focused on this and engaged with seafarers at the moment in discussions exactly on this point as part of this concept of Share Fishermen Plus. So I think there is a specific role for financial literacy training that could help address some of the issues that are raised in the report. So I think all we can say that at the moment is that that's on our radar. It's been addressed, and the Fishermen's Welfare Alliance, in which the two federations are central players, along with a range of other organisations, are very much focused on this.
Thank you, Barry. And Deborah, if you could jump in. Sorry, Deborah, did you have something to say on that point as well? No? Okay, brilliant. Okay, thanks so much for that, Barry. Next question is from Andy Wheeler. Is there an opinion on how the announcement regarding increasing offshore wind farm coverage will affect the future finances of the inshore fleet as their grounds become inaccessible and the possibility of them compromising safety by going further offshore to make a living? And I think, Barry, that one's for you as well, if you don't mind.
I think Andy puts his finger on a very important point. I mean, the financial performance of fishing vessels, including small-scale fishing vessels, is contingent on access to fishing grounds and fish. And there's increasing competition for space in the marine environment. So wind farms are, and the announcement that was made last week for a massive expansion in offshore wind farms is one part of the picture, a very important part. But also the expansion of marine protected areas, that, at least the ones that exclude particular types of fishing. But there are also offshore infrastructure, tide energy, military installations. There's a whole range of cables are another one that impinge on the ability for fishermen to access traditional fishing grounds. That all comes back with a vengeance to what the boats earn, what the crews earn. So it's a very important part of the picture and why we need to look at this very much in the round in a kind of holistic way.
Thank you, Barry. And Paul?
Yeah, just to reiterate what Barry said, of course, as I said in our study, we only really went in depth in two places, which was Newlyn and Whitehaven. And in Whitehaven, this story of the wind farms was very much on the agenda of the fishers. They were telling us how they had to, they had to sail out, for hours and hours and hours to get beyond the cables, with one of the big issues, as well as the wind farms, going much further than they would normally have had to do. So it was having a big impact, and that was one of the issues when we asked what's impacting on your, income generating potential. They said wind farms, cables, and the restrictions that Barry's made. I haven't got a solution, but it's very much on the agenda.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Right, next question is from Chris Williams at NEF. Chris says, I note in the report you say some share fishers, particularly on larger vessels, have significant earning potential. In contrast, the contracted employment of non-EEA crew on larger vessels was regarded as benefiting the companies who could pay their employees much less than would have been due if receiving a share of the profits. Could you please describe how seafarers think this needs to change? Thank you. Who would like to take this question? Catherine?
I think, yeah, I'm happy to take it initially, and then if anyone wants to add to it. I think this really absolutely shows, back to money, that fair pay is at the heart of the issue. And it's really a question for the industry as well to address. We recognise that fishers are often dispersed and isolated, and they don't get those same opportunities to act as a collective group, campaigning for improvements, fair treatment, for pay. And we'd really like to reach out to more migrant workers to understand their issues, but we really need the help of expert delivery partners as well to help us work on that. But it's a really fair question. Do any of my other panelists have something to add to that?
I think it is a legitimate question. I mean, it's interesting that the focus, well, first of all, it is an issue that arises, but particularly in relation to larger vessels. It's not especially obvious in the small scale sector. But it's also interesting that the focus today has been very much on share fishing. And of course, non-EEA crew are required to have employment contracts. So they're in a kind of different category. But I think on the big picture, we owe a duty of responsibility to all crew, whatever their origin and whatever their employment status. So I think that has to be part of the picture too.
Thank you, Barry. Brilliant. Deborah, was that you coming in, or are you just giving your approval? Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so the next question is from Gwilemy. A raising topic in the fisheries sector is also the environmental sustainability of practices and the harmful impacts of some fisheries techniques. It is often difficult for fishermen to switch their practices towards more sustainable ones, as they often lack the time, resources to do it. And they are also often scared that this change could reduce their incomes that are already low. How do you think that this global financing approach of a safety net in terms of advice, technical support and money loans for fishermen could be used and channeled towards the transformation of the sector towards more environmental resilience and less impacts on habitats, or securing incomes for small-scale fishermen? Who would like to take that question?
Is it me again?
I think it might be.
So, I mean, what we recognise is that every fishing method has an environmental footprint, and we must manage that environmental footprint to minimise its impact. There can be a tension between short-term earnings and long-term movement in the right direction. I don't think there's a very glib answer to that. I think that a lot will depend on the fisheries bill that is currently going through Parliament, the fisheries management plans that are part of that, because I think what we have there is an opportunity for fishermen, including small-scale fishermen, through the concept of co-management, to work on what boils down to three questions. Where are we now? Where do we want to be in the future in terms of sustainability and profitability? And how do we get there? And the how do we get there has to embrace those questions about long-term environmental sustainability. So there's always a tension between the two. And as is often the case with fisheries management, it often involves trade-offs. And I think I'm very certain that if you're going to have trade-offs, you need to have a place where you can have the dialogue that leads to the appropriate balance. And I think that I'm quite optimistic that the fisheries management plans that are provided for in the fisheries bill will provide exactly that, the kind of dialogue that's needed at the right place. So I think it's a good and important question, because economics and biology, environment are all intertwined.
Thank you, Barry. And Paul?
Yeah, where I saw that in our studying, talking to the fishers and where we went to, was particularly into relation to those fishers that were fishing non-quota species like whelks. There was that real tension about overfishing the whelks to make sure that they had a decent income. So that was where we noticed it, particularly in the non-quota species.
Brilliant. Thank you, Paul. Okay, brilliant. The next question is from Hazel Lewis. Hazel says, great that Seafarers UK will provide this support for fishers, but should government or industry be doing more? So who would like to answer that? Is that Deborah?
Yes, okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so absolutely, and you know, the key recommendations are about us working with government to move these forward, and actually DEFRA have already started facilitating some conversations. But Hazel, as we said, you know, issues like, for example, the welfare benefit system. This is something that actually we need to be lobbying on, not just with you know, not just within the fishing industry, but also joining with similar organisations who represent similar. So if we're looking at share fishers, you know, like the gig economy, and you know, looking at the self-employed, and getting together and lobbying the government for this different package of support. This is something that's already come up through COVID, actually, interestingly, because the self-employed, of course, were left on the shelf, and actually that's where fishers found themselves initially with COVID, that they didn't fit into many of the packages that were being offered by government, and the voice of the self-employed started to come out. So we should be joining with organisations like Turn to Us, Joseph Rowntree Foundation and others, and doing an advocacy campaign and working within government to see what can be done. And again, you know, as we said, this is a massive, massive ask. So it's not going to be easily won, but it is something that we're absolutely focused on trying to move forward slowly, catchy monkey.
Thanks so much, Deborah. Okay, the next question is for Madeline, and it says here, what can be done to help make women in fisheries more visible, and why is it important that women and their various roles in fishing are more visible?
I think that...
Oh, sorry, Barry, that was lovely to hear afterwards.
But actually, yeah.
But I'd love to hear your point.
I mean, why is it important to, what was the question, to make women more visible?
Yeah, and then why their various roles in fishing are more, why is it important that women and their various roles in fishing are more visible?
Well, I mean, as if you look at sort of real life scenarios of real life, what is happening, going on in the real life of fishing families, you can see how they play such an important role in that context. And by not seeing that, you actually fail to sort of actually properly take into account how fisheries operate. And how can that be done? Well, I mean, first of all, you have to actually recognize that context. You have to widen the perspective of how fisheries is understood. What does it take to capture a fish, basically? And I mean, in the policy brief that I mentioned at the end of my talk, we talk a lot about how sort of you can take this forward. And one of the things is to network amongst women, that women themselves can formulate objectives around what needs to be done. And we are actually trying to set up a company for UK women in fisheries. So if there's anyone that want to get involved, that is one way of sort of directly trying to phrase this sort of action plan forward, let's say.
Brilliant. Thanks, Madeline. And Barry, did you have something to add there?
No, I mean, I fully recognise the picture that Madeline paints there. The informal safety net, the business decisions, and also the role that skilled filleters play in terms of the backbone of the fishing sector. I mean, just to plug our own historical practice, we've had female chair and president of the NFFO, and our executive committee has a very strong presence of women, and also the people that we're dealing with at senior levels of government are to a large extent female. So at the high levels within the industry, there's quite a strong female presence. Of course, you don't have high levels of women in fishing crews, and there's a variety of reasons for that, including accommodation and facilities. So I think there has been progress, and that progress has been mainly made at the senior level. So I just add that to kind of complement the picture that Madeline paints, which I fully recognise. Thanks.
And Madeline?
Can I just add to that? Yeah, because obviously I don't want to say that women are always like in these roles. Women fish. I mean, my project has been much broader. I've spoken to women that fish, women in professional roles in the industry. So, that is also something that obviously has to be recognised, just as Barry says. Yeah,
brilliant. Thanks, Madeline. Right, we are running out of time, but there's a time for a couple more questions. So the next one is from Jim Portis, and he says, there is a mention of apprenticeships for fishermen. Such have never been available, and unless there is government intervention, they are unlikely to be created. How can the gap be filled to enable there to be not only apprenticeships, but also a full career path from deckhand to skipper? And I see here that, Barry, you're going to answer this question, but anyone else who wants to jump in afterwards, feel free.
I think Jim makes a good point. my understanding is that there are and have been apprenticeship arrangements. That there's one under consideration within Cornwall. Whitby Fishing School has run them in the past. I think very much to be supported. One of the general challenges facing the industry, and also one that refers back to why there are so many non-EEA crew working in the UK, is just shortage of crews, and that relates very much to training, encouragement of fishermen to join, and to provide an understanding of the industry, that there can be secure, good career opportunities within the industry. So I think it's very much part of our work, and will be part of the Fishermen's Welfare Alliance work as well. Thank you.
Harry. Okay, brilliant. Paul?
Just to add, just one thing that came up in a lot of our discussions, which was I found very interesting and relates to this particular question, not so much on apprenticeships, but on the appeal of fishing to young people. Often when I spoke to fishers about their sons, they didn't want them to go into fishing. They didn't see it was a career path that they wanted them to follow. And when we spoke to young people, particularly in Whitehaven, they too were not interested in going into fishing that their family for generation had been in. So in this lack of a full career path from deckhand to skipper, it's not promoted in schools as part of career. It's leaving young people not, well, from my point of view, from the study that we did, seemingly not being attracted into the industry. And of course that has the impact that Barry says on non-EEA crew on other boats.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, so we've got 1 minute, so I'm just going to try and fit one more question in, and this one is from Jeffrey Parfitt. And he says, does the panel agree that poverty and safety are inextricably linked to economic necessity and risk? This report has fundamentally changed my understanding of some of the casual factors of safety relating to the fishing industry, and I believe will need to be revisited. Who would like to take this question? Catherine?
I mean, I think the short answer is yes. I think the report absolutely highlights everything that he said in that. I think it's a really complimentary question, actually, because it highlights the importance of our research. From my perspective, one of the things we want to do is really get to the root cause of the issues that cause disadvantage and cause fishers to fall into difficulty. We want to tackle some of those problems that Paul just referred to as well. So the report does do that, and it really shows how much more work there is to do.
Lovely, thank you, Catherine. Okay, that's pretty much what we've got time for, and I'm going to hand back to Catherine, but I just wanted to note that if you have burning questions and you want them answered, then please do email Seafarers and we can get those answered for you. And I would like to say that I've seen some excellent conversation going on in the chat, some really great kind of answers to some of the discussion that's been going on. So we will make that available, and if you can have a look now, please do. And I'll hand back to Catherine, but thanks so much to the panel. And thank you to the attendees for all of your questions.
Thank you very much, Harriet. Before we go, I want to say a really big thank you to all of our contributors today, to Paul, Madeline, Miles, Barry and Deborah, and also to Craig Easton for sharing his fantastic photos of fisherwomen's work. Thank you very much indeed. I'd also like to thank the Mindfully Wired team for their work supporting this webinar and designing the report. And I'm also thanking Tina Barnes, who's absolutely been here supporting our work on this. She's our grants manager. She had the initial idea for this research and has led it from start to finish. An enormous thank you. I've certainly learned a huge amount from her about fishing, and I'm extremely reliant on her in taking this forward with Deborah. Her commitment and drive to improve life for fishers through better understanding of the core problems is leading us to some really clear opportunities to work on in collaboration with government, with industry and with delivery partners. So as we've heard today, this is not the beginning. There's lots and lots to do moving forward, and we really look forward to working with all of you on that. So also thank you to everyone listening in today, and for those of you who might listen in the future as well, for taking time to join us, for being interested in the welfare of fishers and families. There's a huge amount to do, and I hope you found it really interesting, but thank you.